May it please the court, Your Honor, the defense calls Zach Hughes.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated. Please state your name for the record.
Zachary David Hughes.
Zach, how old are you?
I'm 32 years old.
Are you married?
No.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I do.
Tell this jury about your brothers and sisters.
I have 5 brothers and sisters. One is my biological brother, Eli, and the rest are my adopted siblings.
At one point, did you have 6 siblings?
Yes, I did.
Talk about that in a minute. Where were you born?
I was born in San Luis Obispo, California.
Did you grow up in the entirety of your childhood in California?
No, I did not.
From California, where did you and your family move?
We moved to Southwest Virginia when I was 11.
While you were still living in California, did you discover that you had an aptitude for music?
Yes, I did.
What, if anything, did your mom or dad do by way of an instrument to help you learn how to play music?
When I was maybe 4 or 5, my dad found an old Gulbranson upright piano at a yard sale, and he bought it for, I think, $300 and rolled it down the street to our house. So I had an instrument to tinker on when I was young, even before I started piano lessons.
Describe, just in general to this jury, what was your, while you were in California and early on in Virginia, what was your home life like? What was it like to grow up in your house?
I had a great childhood. I have great parents. They raised my biological brother and I before we adopted in a Christian household. They taught us good values, the importance of good morals and service to others, and they supported me in every way imaginable, and I'm very grateful for them.
Zach, you may want to back up just a little bit from the microphone. I think you'll get just a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Thanks. Describe for the jury, you talked about your Christian values in the household. Describe for the jury sort of the, early on at least, the connection between your parents supporting you playing music and the Christian dynamic in your family.
Yeah, originally when I was 9, my parents started me on piano lessons. Our pastor's daughter taught piano lessons, and my dad wanted me to play hymns and family devotions.
You testified earlier that you and your family moved to Virginia. Tell this jury where you and your family moved in Virginia.
It was a town called Abingdon. It's right next to Bristol, Virginia, which is known for the NASCAR Speedway. Describe
to the jury what your family's residence was like. Where did you live, and sort of describe that dynamic.
We moved to a small 3.5-acre farm. My parents liked the idea of raising some farm animals and giving my brother and I the opportunity to do physical work on a farm, and just the opportunity to be close to nature and grow up understanding the value of hard work.
In 2005, did your family grow beyond just you and your brother and your parents?
Yes.
Describe for the jury how your family grew in 2005.
The church we were a part of at a time really encouraged adoption, especially for families or couples who weren't able to have kids at that point in their life or at all. And as a result of this belief in the church that it was good to adopt, there were emails that would be passed around occasionally. And there was an email that was passed around with a photo of 5 Russian siblings who were up for adoption in Russia. And my family saw these photos, and our heart really went out to these kids. At first, we thought they were all boys because their heads were all shaven for lice, and they were all wearing sort of the same kind of clothes, hand-me-downs. But they were 3 girls and 2 boys. And after a lot of prayer and thought and discussion about it, we decided we wanted to adopt these kids because essentially if we didn't, who would?
So, just briefly, let's talk about these kids. How old was the oldest child at the time your parents adopted them?
She was 10.
What was her name?
Her Russian name was Yelena, but we gave all the kids American names. So her name was Grace when we adopted her.
So Grace was 10. How old was the youngest?
18 months.
We're going to come back to them in just a little bit. At some point, did you and your family move to South Carolina from Virginia?
Yes.
How old were you when your family moved to South Carolina from Virginia?
I believe I was either 15 or 16.
Where did you and your family move in South Carolina?
We moved to Travelers Rest in Greenville County.
During this time, describe for the jury what is going on in your music progression, your life as a musician, and how you're progressing.
Like I said, I started piano at 9, and when we moved to Virginia, I became increasingly more interested and motivated in it. So by the time I was, say, 14, 15, I was practicing on average 6 to 8 hours a day. We were homeschooled, so this allowed me to do this. And by the time we had moved to Travelers Rest, I was very convinced that I wanted to pursue music as a career.
You testified you were practicing a lot. During this time, did your father do anything to provide the rest of the family some peace while you were practicing so much?
Yes, I like to practice late into the night and into the early morning hours. So my dad actually built me a soundproofed room out in the garage so I could do this without waking the neighbors.
So as your musical capabilities improved and increased, while you're in high school, did you participate in any music festivals, specifically regional music festivals?
Yes, many.
Did you ever win a prestigious regional music festival?
Yes, several.
Describe to the jury what opportunity you were given in connection with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra.
In 2011, I participated in a high school piano festival in Columbia, South Carolina at the University of South Carolina called the Southeastern Piano Festival. And part of this festival, there was an international concerto competition. A concerto is a piece for a solo instrument and orchestra. So in this case, solo piano with orchestra. And that was the Arthur Fraser International Piano Competition. And I was awarded first prize. And part of first prize was the opportunity at a later date to perform a full concerto with the South Carolina Philharmonic. And maybe a year later, we did Beethoven's Emperor Concerto.
You testified about high school and your progression as a musician in high school. I want to talk about college. When it came to go for you to go to college, where did you apply to go to college?
I applied to 5 different conservatories in the country.
Were you accepted to any of those conservatories?
I was accepted to 3.
Where did you decide to go to college?
I went to the Juilliard School in Manhattan.
The year you applied, what percentage of applicants were granted admission to Juilliard?
I believe it was 7.2%.
And you were one of those musicians.
Yes.
When you were accepted, what, if any, inducements or incentives did Juilliard give you to attend their institution?
They offered me a generous financial aid package and a merit-based scholarship.
When did you begin your education at the Juilliard School?
I matriculated in the fall of 2011.
I want to talk about what you did while you were there. While you were at Juilliard, did you have an opportunity to participate in an international music festival?
Yes, I did.
Please tell the jury about that.
There is an international music students festival in Kyoto, Japan, which is called I think the Rome Music Foundation sets it up. And they try to get music students from all over the world, from different countries. So they get a sampling of different countries, and they have a relationship with Juilliard. So an email was sent out to the student body asking if anyone wanted to participate, and I was selected to represent the States in Kyoto for this festival.
And so how many students from around the world participated in this festival?
Maybe 15 to 20.
And how many from America were selected to participate?
1.
And that was just you.
Yes.
Did you graduate from the Juilliard School?
Yes, I did.
When did you graduate?
In May of 2015.
And what was the degree you obtained upon graduation?
A bachelor's of music and piano performance.
Just briefly describe to the jury, after you graduated, what did you do in the music field for employment immediately upon graduation?
I did what a lot of conservatory graduates do who decide not to immediately pursue a higher degree. I did a lot of freelancing. I did some solo gigs, playing concerts. I did some accompanying. I taught some students. And I even took on some work in restaurants to supplement my income.
At some point, were you given the opportunity to be on staff with the Knoxville Symphony?
Yes, I was.
When did you receive, or when was that opportunity given to you?
I heard about the audition, that I heard that a spot had opened up for principal keyboardist in the Knoxville Symphony, and I heard about it 3 days beforehand. So last minute, I learned a bunch of excerpts and auditioned, and I was fortunate enough to get the job in 2017.
You talked about the principal pianist. Tell the jury what the principal pianist, what that title means and what your function was.
It is a principal keyboardist, so it's basically any instrument part in the orchestra that has a keyboard I would be playing. So it could be piano, harpsichord, synthesizer, celesta.
And when did you begin your employment as the principal pianist for the Knoxville Symphony?
In 2017.
When did your employment end with the Knoxville Symphony?
In 2018.
What did you decide to do in 2018 that required you to leave the orchestra? Or the symphony, better.
I decided to enlist with the Marine Corps.
So you're a classically trained pianist. You have an opportunity with a symphony to perform with them, which is regular employment, and you decide to leave that and go serve your country in the Marine Corps. Is that correct?
Yes.
Describe to the jury why you decided to leave your job with the symphony to serve your country in the Marine Corps.
Since about my sophomore year of college, it has been something I've been thinking about, military service. And obviously there's a window of time that you're able to do that in. As you get older, you hit age limits and so forth. And it had just always been something I was interested in, the service of others, service to others aspect of it. I felt like, in a sense, I owed a debt to my country and to do some military service. And I also wanted the opportunity to experience a difficult training environment. And I figured the Marines they had a reputation of being the hardest. So that's the branch I decided to go for.
What, if any, attributes of your childhood or the home environment as you grew up, what, if any, of those attributes played into your desire to join the Marine Corps?
I think the way my parents had always instilled in us a good work ethic and an important sense of just a moral duty to others, it seemed like a very good opportunity for me to further develop some of these things in myself.
You testified that initially you enlisted in the Marine Corps. Ultimately, did your journey continue as an enlisted person in the Marine Corps?
No.
Why not? Tell this jury.
I was speaking with my recruiter, and they ask you a lot of questions, just trying to figure out who you are and what aptitude you might have for different aspects of the service you're going for. And he found out that I had a college degree, which meant, unbeknownst to me, that I was eligible for officer candidate school. So as soon as they found that out, they tried to funnel me into, it's a different recruiting program, but they got me in touch with the officer selection officer and encouraged me to go the officer route.
During the selection process for officer candidate school, were you living in Tennessee at the time?
Yes, I was.
And briefly, if you would, describe for the jury during that period in Tennessee what the process was that was used for officer candidate school, or OCS, for selection.
It's a little different than recruiting. You have to go through a pretty rigorous selection process to even be invited to OCS. So you spend a lot of time with your OSO, or your officer selection officer. And it's their job to essentially train you up and get you ready so that you can pass the review board to get an invitation. So when I was living in Tennessee, I was doing a lot of training with him, preparing for this.
In Tennessee at the time, was there a board that also was tasked with reviewing applications for OCS?
Yes, there was.
And the cycle where you participated or your application was evaluated, do you know how many applicants the board authorized to go forward with OCS during that cycle?
One.
Was that your application?
Yes, it was.
Let's talk about OCS. At the time you began your journey in the Marine Corps, did Marine Corps personnel try to push you to a different area than you wanted to go to?
Yes, they did.
Describe to this jury what they asked you to do or what they wanted you to do.
As a recruiter, there are different boxes that I think you get bonuses in a certain sense if you can check, and one of those is the Marine Corps band. So when they found out I had a background as a pianist, they really tried to get me to join the Marine Corps band.
And when they asked you to join the Marine Corps band, what did you say?
I declined. That wasn't the reason I wanted to join. I wanted to experience a different side of life, and I was interested in infantry.
Let's talk about OCS. during officer candidate school and your time there, were there metrics that were used by OCS personnel to evaluate physical fitness?
Yes.
Describe to the jury what those metrics were.
There's something called the PFT, the physical fitness test, and it consists of 3 areas. It's pull-ups to failure, maximum crunches under 2 minutes, and a 3-mile timed run.
What's a perfect score on that?
You can get a maximum of 100 in each of the 3 areas, so a perfect score would be 300.
What was your score?
294.
Ultimately, were you able to complete officer candidate school?
No, I was not.
Why were you not able to complete officer candidate school?
I was dropped after the 3rd week of officer candidate school due to level 3 stress fractures in both of my tibias,
So you had broken legs.
more or less.
At the time you were forced to leave officer candidate school, what percentage of the class were you in?
I was in the top 3%.
Do you remember how many members were in your OCS class at this time?
It was more than 400.
When you left OCS, how did you leave it with the Marine Corps?
The CEO of Quantico, which is where Marine Corps OCS is at, asked me to return. He essentially told me to go home, heal, retrain, and come back.
And we'll talk about this more, but ultimately, did you return?
No, I did not.
At this time, do you consider yourself a United States Marine?
No, I do not.
Why?
That's a title you have to earn, and since I haven't completed my training, I did not earn it.
After you suffered the fractures in your legs, where did you go to rehabilitate and to heal?
I went back to Traveler's Rest, where my family is, and I stayed with them while I was healing.
And just to put a time on this, is this approximately 2019? Is that right?
This is late January of 2019.
So now you're living with your family in Traveler's Rest here in Greenville County. While you were living with your family and rehabilitating your legs, were you presented with an opportunity to play music?
Yes, I was.
Describe to the jury what that opportunity was.
Through a series of mutual acquaintances, a woman by the name of Jeanette Wynn sent me an email and asked me if I would be willing to play an inaugural concert for their church. They had just received a gift of a very fine piano, and they wanted to have this concert sort of as a thank you to the donor and to show the congregation what it sounded like.
And so you were asked to perform using the gift of the piano that the church had received. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was your response to that invitation?
At first, I was inclined to say no because I was about 6 months out of practice. But the more I thought about it, it seemed like it would be a good thing to do while my legs were healing, so I accepted.
Describe to the jury, when did you play the inaugural concert on the piano on that field?
I believe it was in June of 2019.
Were you to be paid for the performance?
Yes, I was.
Describe to the jury what the arrangement for the payment would be.
It was a flat fee honorarium for this one concert.
And was the concert well received?
Yes, it was.
I want to talk about, just briefly, you mentioned Jeanette Wynn in your introduction to the Wynn family. You first met Jeanette Wynn and other members of the Wynn family in what year? Was it 2019?
In 2019, yes.
And over time, did you develop a friendship with the Wynn family.
Yes, I did.
While you developed this friendship, did you share with the Wynn family a long aspiration you had held in the music context?
Yes, I did.
Tell this jury what that aspiration was.
Growing up, Beethoven had always been my favorite composer and something of a personal hero. And in 2020, that was going to be the 250th birthday for him. So I had this dream that I really kind of put on the back burner when I was intending to go through OCS. Well, this dream of playing all 32 of his piano sonatas in a series of concerts. And in passing, I shared this with the Winns.
And when you shared that aspiration you had with the Winns, what was the reaction of the Winns and their church members?
They were very enthusiastic about the idea.
And so their support of your dream, what effect did that have on your decision to go back to the United States Marine Corps?
Playing all of these sonatas is not something you can really just decide to do. You need a venue to present them at, so you need external support. And when I realized how enthusiastic the Winns and their church congregation were about this, I realized that there was actually a real way to do this. So it presented me with a very difficult decision, whether to go back to OCS or whether to do this passion project of mine that I didn't think I was going to ever be able to do. And I eventually chose to do the Beethoven sonatas.
Let's talk about this project. You said 32 Beethoven sonatas.
Yes.
How many pages of music comprises the 32 sonatas?
It's over 600 pages.
If you played those from beginning to end, how long would it take to get through all 32 sonatas?
It depends how fast you go, but roughly 11 to 12 hours.
To your knowledge, how many people have been able to accomplish this endeavor?
I don't know the exact number. It's not many. It's something, probably only a dozen or two pianists have ever recorded. As to how many pianists have actually done it, I don't know if there's a record of that.
So let's talk about what you did to prepare. We're in 2019. When was the first concert on this project? When was that? When were you to perform that concert? When was that scheduled?
In January of 2020.
Where was that going to be? Where was that performance going to take place?
At the Winns Church.
To prepare for this inaugural concert, where were you living?
At first, I was living with my family, and at a certain point, the Winns extended an invitation to me to live with them because they had a piano that I could practice on, and I think they wanted to hear me practice.
So let's talk about January of 2020. Did you have your inaugural concert for this project in January 2020?
Yes.
And where did you perform this concert?
At the Winns Church.
Were you to be compensated for this concert series?
The concerts were donation-based, and the church and I had agreed to split the proceeds 50-50.
Did you perform that concert in January of 2020?
Yes, I did.
How was it received?
Very well.
What percentage of the project, meaning how many sonatas, did you perform in the first concert?
I played 3 sonatas in the first concert.
When was the next concert?
In February of 2020.
How many sonatas did you perform in the second concert?
I think 2
When was the third concert?
in March of 2020.
How many sonatas did you perform in the March concert?
I believe 3.
Were you able to perform a fourth concert in April of 2020?
No, I wasn't.
Why not?
COVID had happened, which was making public gatherings impossible at the time.
So up until April of 2020, if you had to guess, what percentage of the project were you able to complete in those 3 performances?
Maybe a fifth to a quarter.
All right. During this time, were you working anywhere else to make a little extra money?
Yes, prior I had been working at Gianna downtown serving, and at some point I started working there again after COVID had happened. And I also took on some work with my dad, painting houses and laying brick.
So when the pandemic hit, did that put a complete end to your music performances?
For the time being, yes.
At some point, did you decide to perform outside during the pandemic?
Yes, I did.
What instrument did you use to conduct performances outside?
I saved up some money and bought what was the best electronic keyboard on the market at the time. And I needed something portable, and I also wanted something that would do justice to the pieces I was trying to play. So it was a Roland DeVie piano.
Where did you, or how did you get the money to pay for the piano?
Through working with my dad.
So after you got the piano, did you begin to play music on the streets of downtown Greenville?
Yes, I applied for a performer's permit for public spaces, and then I started several times a week taking my keyboard downtown and playing these sonatas at various spots in downtown Greenville.
When did you start performing in downtown Greenville?
It would have been sometime in the summer of 2020.
Where were some of your most frequent locations where you perform music in downtown Greenville?
Probably the most frequent was right in front of Spill the Beans at the entrance to Falls Park, where the fountain is.
I want to talk about an evening in August of 2020 while you were performing outside Spill the Beans. While you were performing, did anyone make contact with you and introduce himself to you?
Yes.
Who was that?
That was John Mello.
Was John Mello by himself, or was anyone with him?
He was with his daughter, Aida Mello.
How old, best you can recall, how old was Aida at the time?
She was 8.
Tell this jury about the interaction you had with John Mello when he first introduced himself when you were Principal of Beans.
I didn't know who he was, but he came up and said he was a musician and asked if I'd be willing to take a request. He said his daughter's favorite piece was Claire de Lune, and I know that piece really well. It's a favorite piece of mine, so I played it for her.
What, if anything, did you observe about Aida while you were playing Claire de Lune?
Like I said, she was 8, so she was pretty young. I had taught a lot of kids before, so I had experience with kids that age and their attention spans, which tend to be very short. So I was really impressed. I could see her out of the corner of my eye, and she was just enraptured from start to finish. Like she wasn't running around. She wasn't on a device. She was just completely caught up in the music, and that made a big impression on me.
After you played John Mello's request, before he left, what, if anything, did he give you?
He gave me a business card.
Did you use it to make contact with him after that first meeting?
Yes, I sent him an email.
Why did you follow up and begin to communicate with John Mello after that first meeting?
I got the impression from a few things he said and from the card that he was in the rock and roll world, which that's something I had never had much contact with as a classical musician. And he seemed like a great conversationalist. He was charismatic and outgoing, and I thought it'd be interesting to get coffee with him at some point.
And did you meet with John again after that night in August of 2020?
Yes, I did.
I want to talk about the period between the time you met John and Aida Mello in August of 2020 until the beginning of October of 2020. During that period of time, how many times did you physically meet with John Mello?
Maybe 6 or 7 times.
When you met with him, was he by himself or was with Aida with him?
With one exception, Aida was always with him.
Tell the jury what the activities you and John and Aida would do together in that period.
We'd get coffee a few times. I saw them and Aida spontaneously because I was performing and they walked up like the first time. We got pizza once. We went to an art gallery, things like that.
Tell the jury what your impressions were of Aida as you got to know her in the late summer, early fall of 2020.
They were extremely positive. She's a really special kid. She was definitely mature beyond her years, like I talked about. She could hold a conversation with adults. She looked you in the eye. She seemed really cultured, like she'd had a lot of exposure to different places. She'd traveled like almost as much as I had. She was always telling me about trips she and her dad had taken, and it was just very evident to me that she was a very healthy, loved child. She clearly loved her dad, and it was obvious that he had done a great job raising her. And I was a kid, and he was a great father.
Let's fast forward to the beginning of October of 2020. When is your birthday?
October 2nd.
On your birthday, October the 2nd, 2020, how did you celebrate your birthday?
At this point, Aida had visitation with her mother, Christina Parcell. So this was the one time I saw John where she wasn't with him. And John wanted to show me some of his favorite taco stands out on Whitehorse Road. So we celebrated my birthday together and went to a couple bars, had dinner, ended up getting tacos at the end of the night.
At the beginning of the night, what was John's mood?
Very festive.
By the end of the night, had his mood changed?
Yes, it had.
Describe what his mood was at the end of the night.
Towards the end, at one of these taco stands, he became very pensive and even distraught. And he started to tell me about really grave concerns he had about his daughter, specifically when his daughter was with her mother, Christina Parcell. And he essentially said that whenever Aida's mother had visitation, he just never could rest easy until he got Aida back. And that he just didn't trust her, and he thought that she wasn't responsible and that she might even hurt her at some point. And I mean, frankly, the mood of the evening took a big dip because of this. It was clear that he just was terrified about the danger his daughter was in, and this made a big impression on me.
So when you were with John on your birthday of October 2nd, 2020, where were Aida and Christina Parcell?
I believe they were on a road trip to see family maybe in Alabama or somewhere farther down south.
When was she due back to Greenville?
I believe the next day or in the next couple of days.
When she returned, where were Aida and John going to go?
They were going to go to Italy.
Did John tell you that?
Yes.
When John told you that he and Aida were going to go to Italy, what did you think about that? What was your reaction to that?
I thought it was great. I knew at this point that John's parents were Italian, and Aida, I thought, stood to gain a great cultural experience from it. And I just thought if I had had the opportunity to travel and live in Italy when I was 8, I would have jumped at that. So I was really excited for both of them.
Did they go to Italy?
Yes.
So in October, John and Aida Mello go to Italy. Tell this jury what you're doing in October, November of 2020, musically and otherwise.
At this point, musically, I was still performing on the streets of Greenville, and I was also talking with someone who curated a museum of historic instruments downtown, the Sickle Music Museum. This man was Tom Strange, and we were discussing the possibility of revamping the Beethoven project I had been planning to do that got cut short by COVID by essentially doing the concert series again throughout 2021, but this time recording them so that we wouldn't have to deal with the issue of gatherings with COVID going on.
And did you and Tom Strange solidify a plan for resurrecting the Beethoven project?
Yes, we did.
Just generally speaking, describe for the jury sort of the intensity of the schedule, the intensity of the lead up to that project.
Yeah, so as a classical musician, at least, just because you've played a piece doesn't mean that like you know it forever and you're never going to forget it and it's never going to cost you any more work. It would be like you may have run a marathon once before in your life, but if you haven't trained for a year, it's not going to be easy for you if you go and try to do it again. So I was going to have to relearn all of this repertoire because I had only been playing certain of the sonatas downtown. And with the recording schedule, I was going to be meeting with him. There was going to be other people and other equipment involved. So essentially, I was going to have to commit to a schedule where we'd meet more or less once a week to record one sonata a week throughout 2021 and stick to that schedule. So it was going to be strenuous and a lot of work, and I knew this going into it.
And when was the first recording set to occur on the project with Tom Strange?
I think around January 2021.
And beginning in January, how many performances on the project? What was the time frame on the remaining performances on the project?
Again, it was roughly one a week. These sonatas are not all the same length. Some are short as like 12 minutes. Others, one lasts about 45 minutes. So depending on the piece, we were allocating enough time for me to get ready.
All right, so let's talk about from, again, October to April of 2020. John and Aida leave in October. Between October and April, describe to the jury what the communications were you were having with John Mello, the frequency of the communications. Just tell them about that.
Like I said, I was excited for them. I was excited for Aida to be able to have this experience. Based on what John had told me about Aida's mother, I thought it was good that there was distance in between them. And our communications had died off a bit after they left. John is interesting. He's also a lot. He's a very dramatic person. And it was a bit of a relief to just not be running into him downtown all the time because I had a lot of practice I was doing. And sometimes I didn't have time to hang out as much as he might have wanted to. So our communications petered out.
Were you relieved in some ways that your communications with him had slowed down or stopped?
To a degree, yeah.
In April of 2021, did your communications with John and the frequency of them increase dramatically?
Yes.
Why did your communications with John increase dramatically in April of 2021?
Like I said, our communications had petered out, but they hadn't completely ceased. So he had let me know that Christina Parcell, Aida's mother, had been filing, I think, some stuff with the family court in Greenville in order to try to get her daughter back. He was very worried that she might succeed in doing this for reasons I've already spoken about. And in April, he sent me a message, and it was clear from the text that he was very upset, just saying that, Zach, they took Aida. What am I going to do? Something about along those lines.
After he told you in April of 2021 that they had taken Aida, did he begin to tell you in greater detail what his concerns were and more information about his concerns?
Yes.
What happened next?
At this point, I found myself in kind of a conundrum because, like I said, I appreciated having some distance from John. But by the same token, I was becoming increasingly more concerned about his daughter, Aida. So while I might have wanted to not continue communicating with John for the sake of his daughter, I felt that I had a certain sense of responsibility to help him with what he was dealing with this custody battle for his daughter's sake. We began communicating probably every day, at least by text, often by phone calls. I was giving a lot of time towards hearing what he had to say, towards trying to help him in any way I could. Some of the things I did to help him were, first, he needed counsel. He needed a lawyer in family court. So I was calling a bunch of lawyers in Greenville, trying to find someone who could help him. And by helping him, help Aida. I ended up cleaning his house in Greenville. He had left it with a tenant who absolutely trashed it. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. Like the air was hardly breathable. So I was buying a dehumidifier, getting cleaning supplies, hiring Mikey Manigo, who testified last week, to help me clean out his house so that he would have a place to show family court, that he had a home that would be a safe place for a little girl and him to be living in. I told him when he came back, I'd pick him up from the airport. But notably, while we were having these conversations, he began to tell me in much more detail what his concerns were about Christina Parcell. And, well, in order for you to understand what my reaction was to what he was telling me, you need to know what my experience was with my oldest adopted sibling, Grace. So when we adopted these kids, we really didn't know much about them.
Objection, Your Honor, maybe approach. Sure.
Please continue.
May it please the court. Zach, where we left off, you were telling this jury about your oldest sister, Grace.
Yes.
Continue.
Thank you. I don't say this lightly, but my oldest sister, Grace, was the most evil human being I've ever met in my life. She was 10 when she came into our family. The Russian government didn't tell us much about the kids, so we weren't aware of any, if any, behavioral issues there may have been. And there were many, but specifically with her. I would describe her without reservation as an affectionless psychopath. It wasn't that she was immoral, it was more that she was amoral. She didn't have a sense of right and wrong. Her emotional compass was seemingly non-existent. She was just dead inside. She was a masterful manipulator and deceiver. She could lie at the drop of the hat for reasons that might involve her personal gain or just for the heck of it. She would invent the most absurd, crazy, gruesome stories just to get a reaction out of people. And she could talk about this stuff with the same tone that you might talk about making a sandwich. And this from a girl that I knew between the ages of 10 to 14. It was incredibly disturbing. And the things I learned about that type of personality have stayed with me my entire life because I've never met someone like this since. And with one exception, I had never even heard someone describe another human being like this. And one of the things that is so dangerous about someone like this is, she was literally like a vampire who would just suck the goodness out of other people around her. She could be very emotional, and she would fake these emotions in order to elicit a response in you, a sympathetic response. And if, for instance, you were accusing her of doing something like stealing or hurting one of her siblings, she would weep and just beg you to believe her and say, no, I didn't do it. And then if you would present her with irrefutable proof that we knew you had indeed done this, it was like a mask would just fall off her face. And I mean, she'd just look at you with shark eyes. And no matter how many times we would go through this cycle with her, where she would deceive us and betray our trust and hurt people in our family, she would always reel us back in, because there's something in normal, good people that wants to believe that someone like this can change. You want to believe that, there's redemption for someone like this and that they might change their ways and become a better person. And she knew that. And she would use that in order to ingratiate herself again and regain our trust, only to betray that trust again harder than she had the first time. And this happened dozens of times, and it created an incredible amount of strife in our home. She could manipulate my parents and drive a wedge between them. She was just an incredibly intelligent person and incredibly evil. And having met someone like that, it made me able to understand, and even though I didn't want to, accept the fact that people like this exist, whether you want to believe it or not. And if you trust them, you are only ever going to get hurt by them again. You have to forgive them at some point. And that was a very difficult thing for me to do. It took me years, but eventually I had to accept an apology from this girl that I never got and was never going to get. And I had to do it for myself. But I would never trust her again. That would be insane. for my own safety or for the safety of others. So this is an experience which I think is somewhat unique. I think most people have not met someone like this. And I mean, we might watch true crime documentaries or things like this, and we know that technically these people are real, but they exist on Netflix or in someone else's lives, and we never once believe that it could be someone we know, or that it could be someone living next door, or that it could be someone that our children play with, or someone we might allow to look after our kids. So knowing this is essential to understanding my reaction to what John began to tell me about Christina Parcell in April and May of 2021, after Aida had been taken back to Greenville. He started describing Christina Parcell's character and her personality. And as he was going through various points, he kept saying, Zach, I know you're not going to believe me. Like, I know this sounds overblown and dramatic, and you probably think I'm exaggerating. And under other circumstances, I would have, because John does, I mean, he's a big storyteller. And, when people are talking about their exes, like, everyone thinks their ex is the Antichrist. So, of course, I was sort of predisposed to be biased against what he was telling me, except for the fact that point by point, everything he described about Christina Parcell was exactly the same as my sister Grace. He told me that Christina Parcell was a master manipulator. He said she can lie at the drop of the hat and you'll never know it. He said she was incredibly charming. He said she was incredibly intelligent and talented. He used to say she was smarter than he was, but that her biggest fault was that she was lazy. And she had this arrogance combined with her laziness that was essentially born out of the fact that she knew she never really had to work too hard at anything in life. And she could even sacrifice trust with people and tell them lies that could easily be found out, because ultimately she was completely confident in her ability to reel someone back in, no matter how bad she had burned them before. And he could have been describing Grace to me because I knew this behavior. I had lived through this behavior. So at this point,
I'm sorry. When he was describing these features to you of Christina, had you ever told him about Grace? Did he know anything about Grace?
no, I don't make a habit of talking about Grace to people. One, it's incredibly difficult to speak about, and two, most people, having not met someone like that, it just doesn't really land most of the time. They don't understand what you're talking about. So no, John had no idea that I'd had this experience with Grace, which made me realize that there was no way he could have possibly invented this, because no one would get it right point by point by point unless they had met one of these people. And that was the first thing that really raised a huge red flag with me and made me think that despite the fact that he can exaggerate and overblow the truth, and he's often not very believable when you listen to him, I was convinced at that point that he must be describing something true, because no one would know how to describe it so specifically and accurately if they were just making it up. And I was right to believe him. So in addition to this description of her character, and one last thing about Grace and Christina by correlation, one thing Grace was she had an addiction to doing was not merely stealing from you or sucker punching one of her siblings just to assert dominance or doing other terrible things to her siblings. She would recruit her other younger siblings to do these things for her. She would get off on making little duplicates of herself and training and enlisting her siblings to act as proxies for her, so that she wouldn't actually get in trouble, because she knew that we all had our eyes on her because of her behavior and we knew we couldn't trust her. So if she even had 2 minutes with one of her younger siblings where no one was within earshot, she would tell them, hey, mom's going to go check the mail. I just saw the mail truck go. When she's doing that, I want you to go run into her bedroom and go into her jewelry, or go and get this for me and we'll split it. Go and get that food that mom said we can't have till the weekend or something. So she was an incredibly corrupting influence on anyone around her that she could exert her influence on. Again, I called her a vampire who sucks the goodness out of others. This is an incredibly appropriate metaphor because that's what vampires do. They're intelligent, they're dead inside, and they eventually kill the people around them unless they find someone who might be useful to them, and then they create a duplicate of themselves that they can control. And this is exactly what Grace would do. So when John was telling me all this, I realized that there was an incredible danger that what Christina Parcell was a future preview of what Aida Mello could potentially become if she was left in this woman's custody and was raised by her. And the facts have borne out that I was right. But
Sustained.
We'll
instruct the jury to disregard the last comment.
Zach, at some point was Grace actually removed from your family?
yes,
Describe for this jury why or the circumstance or the event that prompted her removal from your family.
it had been 4 years of what I've been describing. She had been sent to different girls' homes around the country, many of which had records of never expelling a single student, and she was the first for many of them that they expelled and sent back to us. And it finally just got so bad that we realized she was going to be a physical danger to our family. I discovered a diary that she had made where she described in detail my parents having their eyes gouged out and dying, and how once my parents were out of the way and dead, she would be able to assume her role as rightful queen of the country. So she just had these psychopathic delusions of violence and grandeur. And we called the SS and asked them to remove her from the home.
We're going to come back to that in a second, or in a little while. You testified about things that John told you about Christina. Did he also provide you with other information about Christina that informed your opinion of her or what you came to know about her?
Yes.
What were some of the documents or other pieces of information that John provided you?
No objection to hearsay.
You know, we're not offering it for its truth. We're offering it to show what he knew. In State versus Vic, I've decided, Your Honor, we are not offering it for its truth. Go ahead.
He offered me, among other things, 3 very pertinent collections of information. One was the photographs that have been discussed that I sent in mailings to various people, along with advertisements from an escort website, which were connected with these photographs. These photographs were of Christina Parcell in various stages of undress. And John told me that they were prostitution advertisements from her previous career as a prostitute. And looking at these photographs, there was no doubt in my mind that that's what these were. And I don't say this in any way to try to shame. It's simply that, I mean, who said it? Like pornography, you know it when you see it. Well, I think the same can be said in terms of these photographs. they were not cute, sexy, intimate photographs that someone might send to someone they're dating or something. They were lewd and tasteless, and there was a very clear element of advertising, a commercial element. So when I looked at these, there was a vacant, arrogant, almost derisive look in her eyes that reminded me so much of my sister. It was a look that said, I can get you to do whatever I want because you want what I have to offer you. And coupled with this was a deposition from 2016 that Christina Parcell had given.
And 1 second. Zach. Let me show you, Zach, what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 46. Take a look at this.
Yes, this is the deposition.
All right. This time, the defense removed Defense Exhibit 46 into evidence.
State objects.
Not hearsay. Yeah, just for the purpose of the record, you sustain the state's objection. Is that correct?
I did as far as that.
Yes, sir. After, Zach, after you read the deposition you referenced of Christina Parcell, what did you come to conclude or believe?
I believed that based on various things she freely admitted to in her deposition, that she had a history of using and manipulating men in order to get money and in offering sexual services in return. She admitted to being a pornographic actress and producing a film in South Carolina where she rubbed her feet on a man's penis. She admitted to using sugardaddyforme.com, where she sought out romantic relationships with older men with a clear emphasis on it being a trade, essentially a reciprocal thing, where she was seeking out to be taken care of financially. She said that she had a general disinterest in having children at the time, which is why that she gave up custody of her daughter to John Mello when her daughter was very young. Her lawyer took it.
Objection, Your Honor. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Okay.
You can ask him, like we said, as far as just the effect it had on you,
Understand.
not the specific details.
Understand.
Move on.
Zach, a little while ago, I asked you about documents that John gave you in addition to details he provided you information. We talked about the deposition. Let me show you Defense Exhibit 56. Let me show you Defense Exhibit 56. Is that also a document that John Mello gave you?
Yes,
Did you read it?
I did.
At this time, the defense removed Defense Exhibit 56 in the evidence.
State objects based on the same objection we had in the prior, the prior issue. I think Your Honor's ruling was that he can talk about how it had an effect on him, but not to go into the details.
Your Honor, this is a separate exhibit. It's different than the deposition. It's just a few pages. I'd be happy to argue on this.
I'm going to allow this to come in.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. This is, so again, I will renew my motion to enter Defense Exhibit 56 into evidence. And it's admitted. Is that correct, Your Honor? Zach, take a look at Defense Exhibit 56. Would you, for the jury, let me look at it. Let's do this. Let's see. Zach, this is an affidavit of a man named Alex Fields, is that correct?
Yes.
And I just want to go over this affidavit for you, or with you. Based on your understanding of this affidavit and your communication with John Mello, how did John become aware of this information that led to this affidavit?
John posted an ad on Craigslist asking for information about a woman named Christina Parcell, aka Caroline Warren, and he provided photographs to identify her by.
Is page 2 of the affidavit this advertisement on Craigslist?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to page 1 of the affidavit. Would you please read the second paragraph of this affidavit?
I was at Hall's Chop House in downtown Greenville, South Carolina, when a woman approached me. She said hello and proceeded to ask if I was looking for a date. She said something to the effect of inviting me to bed for an amount of money and that we would not be rushed at all. When I refused her proposition, she proceeded to offer me narcotics. I refused and ended the encounter at that point.
Would you please read just the first sentence of the third paragraph?
There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this woman is the woman that I saw on Craigslist.
And Zach, again, the woman in this advertisement on Craigslist, who's that woman?
Christina Parcell.
Zach, I want to talk about other information John Mello had provided you. You heard testimony from investigator Dan Bell. Do you remember that testimony?
I do.
And do you recall in the state's case in chief, Dan Bevel, both in direct examination and cross-examination, testifying that he had met Christina Parcell in his official capacity before he began his investigation of the letters that were sent?
I remember.
And isn't it true that John Mello shared information with you about interactions he had had with Dan Bell?
Objection. Your Honor, I need a curative instruction on that.
You know, I totally disagree, and I'm happy to argue.
Please proceed.
Yes. So, Zach, you testified about information that John has provided you related to concerns he had about Christina Parcell, especially in conjunction with Aida Mello. We talked about the time period April. I want to move to May. In May of 2021, were you and John Mello continuing to communicate about the situation?
Yes.
In May of 2021, what, if anything, did John ask you to do for him?
Given the extremely grave nature of John's concerns for his daughter, especially while she was in the custody of her mother, Christina Parcell, and potentially being exposed to her mother's boyfriend, Brad Post, who John believed was a pedophile and is a pedophile.
Objection.
Sustained. I instruct you to totally disregard the last comments made by this defendant.
And Zach, you would just, could you just tell this jury what John asked you to do?
Yes. Given his concerns, John asked me that if I believed his daughter was in grave danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $5,000?
What did you say when he asked you that?
I was shocked and insulted by the request, and I gave him an immediate and unequivocal no.
So he offered you $5,000 if you would kill Christina Parcell, and you said no.
That's correct.
At some point, did he revisit that subject?
Yes.
Did he make you another offer?
Yes, he did.
How long after the first offer did he make the second offer?
I'm not certain, but I would say maybe 2 or 3 weeks later.
Tell this jury about that.
He was becoming increasingly more worried and distressed about the safety of his daughter. I was as well. The more I learned about this situation and everything, and a lot more than what I've told you, I was also.
Sustained.
What was the second offer?
The second offer, he asked me again, if I became convinced that his daughter was in danger, would I be willing to kill Christina Parcell for $10,000?
What did you, or how did you respond to that offer?
I told him, John, there's no amount of money that would ever tempt me to do something like this. And I told him I was insulted that he even thought that would be something I would consider. So I told him I would never do something like this for money. I told him the only way I would ever consider taking action like this is if I was absolutely convinced that his daughter was not only in danger, but that the only way to rescue her from that danger would be to take Christina Parcell's life.
Let's talk about what else is going on in your life in May of 2021. Tell this jury what you're doing with the music project with Tom Strange, how that's going.
We've been at the project recording the sonatas in the museum, like I talked about, for about 5 months. This, of course, I was doing in conjunction with all the help I was trying to provide John and Aida. So the music project on its own would have been incredibly stressful. And with everything else, I was just approaching burnout. Honestly, I was having a really hard time meeting my deadlines, and I was worried that the quality of the work I was doing was going to be going down, and I was just at the point where I needed a vacation, honestly.
And we're gonna get to that in just a second. Tell the jury about your compensation as it relates to the music project with Tom Strange.
It was just an arrangement of a flat fee for all 32 sonatas. I was going to receive $5,000.
And if you broke that down on an hourly basis, how much were you getting paid per hour for that project?
Probably less than $1, but it was a labor of love.
During this time, were you also doing other things to try to make money to support yourself, or was it?
Yes, I was giving some outdoor concerts on the Wynn's lawn, and these were donation-based, so people were supporting me financially in that regard.
You talked about needing a vacation at the end of May. Describe a little bit more to the jury the fatigue and why you believed at the end of May that a break would do you some good.
Well, I needed a break. My nature is usually to just try to push through stuff like that. I can push myself too far. So I was not necessarily seeking out a break or a vacation, but I was definitely at the point where I needed one for the sake of my work, for the sake of my health.
Did you get that break?
Yes, I did.
Describe for the jury how that came about.
Like I said, John and I were communicating pretty much every day at this point. Much of it, if not most of it, about Aida. But I was also mentioning to him what I was doing. Certainly times when he needed me to do something and I would have to say, I can't, I'm practicing, I'm recording something like this. So he told me, I think he said, like in the rock and roll business, we say you have a monkey on your back, like the project is starting to own you and you just need to step away from it. You're too close to it and you've been in it for too long. So he suggested that I come and visit him in Italy.
Did you take him up on that suggestion?
Yes, I did.
Initially, what was your reaction to that offer?
Initially, I didn't want to. Like I said, it's my nature to just kind of push through things, but with some more time, I realized that some time off from the piano would probably do me good.
So when did you go to Italy to visit John?
I think in either the very last days of May or first days of June, 2021.
Who paid for your travel?
I did.
When you arrived in Italy, where did you stay?
I stayed at John Mell's apartment.
How long were you there?
Between 3 and 4 weeks.
Do you remember where in Italy you were?
Yes, it was a town called Rovigo. It's not too far from Venice.
When you were visiting in Italy, where was Aida Mello?
She was in Greenville with her mother.
Even though Aida was not in Italy, while you were in Italy, did you have an opportunity to see Aida?
Yes, I did.
Describe for the jury what that opportunity was.
John had video visits ordered by the guardian ad litem, who you've seen before, Vanessa Cornwell, to have video visits twice a week with Aida. So he, even with the time difference, was always setting timers and alarms and making me set timers and alarms to make sure he wouldn't be late for these visits. Like he lived for these visits every week. So often it might be 11 p.m. or midnight in Italy, but that was when Aida was free. So that's when they'd have their visit. And I would often be within earshot to where I could hear their conversation. Often I would be able to observe the screen of his phone or computer so I could see Aida's face, her disposition. And on one occasion, I said hi to her.
What did you notice about her, or what did you conclude about her while you were watching Aida during the visitations?
So John had been telling me for weeks, Zach, Christina's killing my little girl. Like, I can see the spark dying in her eyes. And again, when I first heard that, I thought, aren't you being a little dramatic? Like, I hadn't seen her, but it just seemed a bit much. When I saw her in these visits, I didn't feel that way anymore. She was not the same little girl that I had known in Greenville when I first met them. She had put on a great deal of weight, probably about 20 pounds, which is roughly a quarter of her body weight. For an 8-year-old girl, that's a lot in a short period of time, but it was much more than that. It was her demeanor. Her spirit was just, she was morose, she was depressed, like that spunky, precocious, lively little girl that I had met was just not present there. It was a complete change in character. And I mean, John would ask her how she was doing, and she would always try to give a good response. Like, she would try to smile and say, "Oh, I'm fine, Daddy," and try to put on a good face. But it was clear that she was doing that because she didn't want to worry her dad. She didn't want him to realize how poorly she was doing. And it just reminded me so much of myself when I was a little older than she was, with what I've previously described with Grace. It's this, you internalize things. Like, she's a strong person. And she was trying to be stronger than she was probably ready to be at that age. And despite the stoic, strong exterior she was trying to put on, I could just see that she was being tortured. Like, she was drowning. And him saying that the spark was dying in her eyes was absolutely accurate. I could see it. I could hear it in her voice. I could tell it in her demeanor.
So when you came, wait back up. When did you leave Italy to return to Greenville County?
At the end of June 2021.
When you returned to Greenville in June of 2021, based on everything that you knew and had been made aware of, and I want to start in June. What, if anything, in June of 2021 did you do to act on what you knew?
I had described the mailers that I had put together before, and the state has talked about them a lot. All of these mailers contained information that I believe had been put out publicly and by Christina Parcell's free will. So this was all information that had been available publicly, and that, to the best of my knowledge, was true. And I began to send these mailers to Christina Parcell and her boyfriend and people in the neighborhood for a threefold purpose. I wanted parents around that neighborhood to know that their children were not safe around her or around Brad Post. I wanted different people associated with this, such as the guardian ad litem, the police, to have access to this information, so that they would have all the evidence that I was looking at that clearly demonstrated that Christina Parcell was a danger to children and her own daughter. And I also wanted there to be social pressure on Christina Parcell, because something again, about people like Grace and Christina Parcell is the facade that they erect around themselves and the image that they put forward to the world is so important to them. They're narcissists. And it is a facade. It's completely untrue. But I was hoping that it wouldn't be worth it to her for other people to see her for what she was, in exchange for her trying to fight to have her daughter.
You sent multiple mailers beginning in June and going into July of 2021. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Did those mailers and the effect those mailers had do anything to alleviate your concerns?
No, they didn't. If anything, Christina Parcell and Brad Post just dug their heels in deeper.
After the mailers were sent, do you know whether or not they had any effect on? Back up. I want to talk about after the mailers were sent. Did you learn of a video call or about a video call that John, who was in Italy, had with Aida, who was in Greenville?
Yes.
What did you learn about that video call?
Shortly after these mailers would have arrived, John described a call to me where he said Christina was, at the end of the call, she took the phone and turned it towards her face, which she usually did not do. And he said she was more angry than I've ever seen her. And he would often talk about how you would never see her angry, like she was very good at controlling her emotions and not showing if you had made her angry. And she took the phone and didn't say anything, but just slid her finger across her throat as if that she was threatening that she was going to have him killed for what she believed he was doing.
After the mailer, or the last mailer, did John share with you any information he had received via email?
Yes, he described, well, he didn't describe it, he sent it to me, an email he had received from someone he knew in the biker community, motorcycles. And Brad Post was also involved in the biker community, or at least tried to be. And this email was from this acquaintance of John, telling John that Brad Post had been going around essentially asking for someone to, quote, put the hurt on John Mello, and that he was offering a lot of money to make this happen.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Must be your side.
Zach, we talked about the fact that you testified that you sent the mailers, you've explained why. I want to talk about something else you did for the purpose of acting on a concern. take a look at what's been marked as defense exhibit 47. Is that an affidavit that you completed for the purpose or in connection with the pending family court litigation between John Mello and Christina Parcell?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, this is defense counsel's version. This is already in evidence. The state put that in. Zach, let's talk about this affidavit.
Is that the one from September?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes. Zach, why did you draft this affidavit?
I was extremely concerned about the danger that Aida was in, and I wanted to try to provide the family court with information about my opinion and my observations about her that would hopefully cause them to return Aida to John so that she would no longer be in danger.
Did this affidavit, well, let me back up. To whom did you send this affidavit?
I had it notarized, and then I think I scanned it and probably emailed it to John or left it with his family court attorney, Samantha Larkins, at the time.
One second. Let's move on. So that affidavit was, I believe, September the 21st of 2021, is that correct?
I don't remember the date other than it being in September.
I'll show it to you.
Yes, the 21st day of September, 2021.
And you testified that after you submitted that affidavit, that did not do anything to alleviate your concerns, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you take another step to try to act on your concerns for Aida?
Yes.
And did you take that step at the end of September or beginning of October?
Yes, I made a phone call to Child Protective Services, and I told them that I was a neighbor. So I told them that I had seen Aida being verbally and physically abused by her mother. And again, I made that up. That's not true. But I said it because I wanted to give Aida an opportunity to have FaceTime in person with an agent from DSS away from her mother, where she could tell them that her mother was sexually abusing her.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. You are to disregard the last comments from this witness.
Zach, let me ask this. You talked about Child Protective Services. Is that in South Carolina, is that called DSS?
I think they may be part of the same entity. I'm not sure.
And so did they do anything to alleviate your concerns?
No.
Did that surprise you at all?
No.
In fact, you testified earlier about Virginia and Grace. Did you and your family have interaction with the DSS in Virginia
Yes, we did.
over Grace?
Yes, when I discovered the journal, I had mentioned before about Grace's plans to murder my family. We called DSS and asked for her to be taken out of the home. And they did this. And after a few weeks of hearing Grace's stories and lies, they took her side. They failed to recognize what they were dealing with her. And they tried to have my parents put in jail and the rest of me and my siblings put in foster care. And we eventually had to sue them. And it was about a 2-year-long court battle. And that left an indelible impression on me, just as to how even experts can be wrong sometimes. And when they are wrong, it's so dangerous because everyone believes them because they're the experts. But sometimes you know what you know, and you know it's true. And even if an expert might think differently, it doesn't mean they're right. And DSS did a lot of damage to my family in those 2 years.
So ultimately, Grace was removed from your family. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your other Russian siblings were not, were they?
No.
In fact, Faith, one of your Russian siblings, has been in Fort all week. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you testified to this jury about the information you received from John Mello about his concerns. You've testified to the jury about the documents you consulted about those concerns. You testified to the jury what you came to believe. You testified to the jury about the mailers you sent, about the affidavit you submitted, and now about the call to DSS. After you had done all these things to act on your concerns, and nothing had been done, tell this jury in early October of 2021, what's going on in your mind? What are you thinking?
I was still in the middle of this music project, so I had a lot on my plate there just professionally, and of course I was continuing and even increasing my support to help John save his daughter, Aida. And since June, when I had returned, I had been absolutely convinced that Christina Parcell was sexually abusing her daughter.
Let's go. I mean,
Take the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, as I stated at the outset of this trial, I am the sole judge of the law in the case, while you, the jury, sit as the judge of the facts. And part of my role is to make determinations about what evidence can and cannot be admitted and presented to you, the jury. The gatekeeping role rests solely with me, the judge on the law, and I want to instruct you that you're not to consider any testimony that I have instructed you to disregard. Furthermore, you should not even mention or discuss any testimony that I've instructed you to disregard, and I instruct you not to discuss any topics that have been ruled improper when you go to do your deliberation room, okay? All right, please continue, Mr. Mormon. Will incorporate.
Zach, before we broke for lunch, we were in the time period of end of September, beginning of October of 2021. You remember that?
Yes.
And Zach, you testified before lunch about two offers John had made you to kill Christina Parcell. Do you remember that?
I remember.
And do you remember after the second offer telling John something to the effect of, you would never do that for money. You would only do that if you believed it was necessary to rescue Aida.
And if I believed there was no other way.
At the end of September, beginning of October 2021, did you conclude that you had to rescue Aida and there was no other way?
Yes, I did.
Let's talk about what's happening in your life in the beginning of October 2021. And specifically, I want to talk about the status of the music project you had been engaged with Tom Strange in the Seagull Museum. I also want to talk about other employment opportunities. So tell the jury what was going on in your life on that front at the beginning of October.
At the beginning of October, I was just coming off finishing the project at the museum. We finished in September at some point. And as I mentioned before, my birthday is October 2nd. So I had arranged to play a private home recital at the Wynn's home, where I would play the last three piano sonatas of Beethoven on my birthday. So these are very, very difficult pieces of music, and some of the greatest pieces of music ever written. So I was very preoccupied trying to give my best to these pieces. And shortly after that, a friend of mine reached out who had done some work performing on cruise ships. There's an organization called Lincoln Center Stage that recruits conservatory-trained musicians to form either a piano quartet or a piano quintet to play classical concerts on cruise ships. And they had a pianist drop out at the last minute, and long story short, I interviewed for this job and got this job, I think on October 12th, but it was about that time, maybe a little earlier.
Where were the winds on October 12th and 13th?
They were in Europe.
And ultimately, did you take Christina Parcell's life on October the 13th?
Yes. because I believed it was absolutely necessary to save Aida, and I was right.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. I ask you to disregard the testimony that you just heard.
I want to talk about, the timing. You've alluded to it a little bit. But I want to be more specific. October the 13th, describe for the jury why you felt that was the time, why you believed it, or why it was necessary to do it on October the 13th, specifically, or in this period of time.
I had been wrestling with this since June. As I previously stated, since the end of June, I believed Aida was in complete and grave danger every moment of her life that she was living with her mother. And the other things that I had tried to do to save her from that were not working. So I was having this incredible wrestling match within myself for these months, feeling that I needed to do something to save her, and yet feeling this incredible reluctance to do the one thing that I knew would save her because of how terrible I knew it would be to do it, even though I believed it would be right. So by the time October 13th rolled around, I had been grappling with this for a long time, and I was experiencing a tremendous amount of guilt that I had waited as long as I did, because I should have acted sooner, and I didn't do that. So I had come to the realization that I had gotten this offer to go on this cruise ship, and I would have been leaving the country for a long time. Essentially, it was now or never. I had an opportunity to save her from a danger that I knew she was in, and that I knew was not going to cease. And I just couldn't go on with my life and leave her to drown. I mean, I had a great life. I had everything. I made money doing what I loved. I was going to be going to the South Pacific to play concerts for rich people on cruise ships. I mean, but how could I go and enjoy that and know that I was leaving a kid to her fate, a kid who thought that I was her friend? I would never have been able to look at myself in the mirror again if I had done that. So, specific to October 13th, I believed that there would be a period of time at the house when Christina Parcell would be alone. And I wanted to make sure that absolutely no one was there. Not Aida, not Lutina, not Brad Post. Because again, this was not about revenge or retribution or anything. I wasn't angry. The only thing I was feeling that day was pity. And I wanted to make sure that no bystander or no one else would be involved in this, which could have happened if someone else was there.
Let's talk about that. So once you concluded, believed absolutely this was what you had to do, did you go about planning?
Yes, I planned very carefully to make sure, one, like I said, that no one else would be involved in this. And two, I knew that if I tried to do this and failed, it would only be worse for Aida.
And consistent with the court's instructions, why did you believe it'd be worse for Aida?
Because I believed that if I was discovered doing this, it would connect me to John Mello. And I believed, and I still believe, that he's a great father and he is Aida's best shot at having a happy and safe childhood.
Let's talk about the planning. Did you get a gun?
Yes.
At the time, were you also carrying your own firearm?
Yes, I had a concealed weapons permit at the time, so I generally would always be carrying a 9mm concealed weapon on my person for personal protection.
Did you get another firearm for this?
Yes, I did.
What type of firearm did you get?
It was a .22 caliber revolver
Where did you get it?
at a gun show.
Where was the gun show?
It was here in Greenville.
How long before October 13th did you get the 22?
Maybe a month or month and a half earlier.
Did you also get a knife?
Yes, I did.
Where did you get the knife?
At the gun show.
At about the same time?
It was the same day.
Let's talk about what else, what other planning you did. Did you obtain gloves?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember where you got the gloves?
No, I don't.
Did you obtain any chemicals?
Yes, I bought some paint thinner because, again, I didn't want to be connected to this because I wanted to make sure this would actually do something to save Aida. So in case a glove had broken or I had left a fingerprint or something, I wanted to be able to clean it with the paint thinner.
Zach, let's talk about your bike and what you did to become familiar with the area of Canebrake leading up to October the 13th.
I had looked at a route I would be able to take from the mountain house that I was staying at on back roads to avoid traffic cameras. So maybe a few days beforehand, I looked at Google Maps and I figured out how this route would lead.
Let's talk about October the 12th. Did you originally plan to do this on October the 12th?
Yes.
Zach, consistent with the court's instructions, describe to the jury why you didn't do it on October the 12th.
I woke up that day and I just felt such reluctance, and something in my gut told me it wasn't the right day. And I waited one more day.
Let's go to October the 13th. You testified earlier that you wanted to plan in part to prevent or minimize danger to others. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Did you have information about where people would be on October the 13th?
To a degree, yes.
How did you get that information?
From John Millo.
What did he tell you?
He told me when Aida would be at school, and he told me that he believed Christina had a job interview at some point that morning.
So let's talk about that morning. The evening of October the 12th, where did you spend the night?
At the mountain house.
You woke up on the morning of October 13th and you left the mountain house, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Do you remember approximately when you left the mountain house?
It was much later than I meant to. I think it was about 8 or 8:15 in the morning.
When you left the mountain house, in which vehicle did you leave?
In my Ford Ranger.
What was in the back of the Ford Ranger?
My bike.
That bike right there?
Yes.
And just for the clarity of the record, this is a state's exhibit. I don't have the number that was in the case. What else did you put in your pickup truck in addition to the bike?
I brought the gloves and I put this in a backpack. I brought the paint thinner and the gun I described, the .22. I brought a knife and I brought a box that was made to look like a gift wrapped box and a bunch of roses that I had bought the day before.
Talk about the roses in a minute. When you left the mountain house, where did you go?
I drove to a road that runs parallel very close to Canebrake.
When you got to that location, well, before we go further, describe for this jury the ride in your truck from the mountain house to this location, what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what was going through your mind.
Like I said, I had wrestled with this for months. I had come to the point where rationally I knew that the only way Aida was going to be saved from what she was enduring was for me to take this route. I knew that. But there's another element, a human element, which is just so reluctant and revulsed by the idea of taking a human life. So I had prayed a great deal about this. I had prayed like I'd never prayed before, because even knowing that logically this was the right thing to do, it didn't satisfy that emotional and human aspect where I felt that I needed permission to do this. And I was so terrified that somehow I might be doing the wrong thing. Like I knew that it was right logically, but there's the emotional aspect was just reeling against this idea. And more so because she was a woman. I was raised to always protect my sisters and mother, and I opened doors for women growing up. So this idea was just repugnant to me, even though I believed it was necessary to save a child. So on that morning, I had prayed earlier, a few days earlier, and I had felt that this was the right thing to do, no matter how terrible and difficult it was going to be. So like I said, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity because I realized that this was just the only way to save a child. And it felt like a foregone conclusion because I knew that I had a duty to do this to save a child. So physically driving my truck there, I was experiencing a level of anxiety and physical illness that I had just never experienced due to stress before. My hands were shaking. I was in a cold sweat, and I was fighting the urge to vomit before I even got close there. a few times I thought I was going to have to pull off to the side of the road because I could hardly keep my truck straight. My hands were shaking so badly. But the whole time I was just thinking, if I don't do this, if I turn back, then I'm consigning Aida to her fate when I know that I could have done something to stop what was happening. So I just tried to take my mind off of it, and I tried to just go and drive a little bit farther and a little bit farther and not think about what I was going to have to do when I got there. And when I finally got to the point where I parked my truck, this feeling only increased. I knew the plan, but I was having so much difficulty going through with it. So I took my bike out of the truck, and I had a mask on and clothing that's been described already. And I just tried to focus on putting one foot in front of the other on my bike. And it felt like some runs or rucks I had been on where all I could do was focus on putting one foot in front of the other because it was so difficult to keep going. And I just kept seeing Aida's face and reminding myself that if I don't do this, no one's going to come to save her. And I kept pedaling, and eventually I arrived in front of 122 Canebrake.
Zach, we're going to talk about what happened when you got to 122 Canebrake in just a second. You described having a gun and having a knife. Initially, were you going to use the gun?
Yes.
Did you ultimately decide to use the gun?
No.
Why not?
I was very concerned about using a gun because of how loud it would be. And I didn't want to alert a neighbor or a bystander who might come to investigate and get involved. So I tried to suppress the gun by making a makeshift suppressor. And in movies, these things are made out to be like it's very easy, and a suppressed gun is just very silent, and that's not the case. So ultimately, I test fired the gun, and I had bought some subsonic ammunition, which is supposed to be quieter, but I didn't realize that on a revolver, a suppressor doesn't work because the end of the cylinder is open. And I realized just a day or two beforehand that I couldn't use a gun because it could potentially involve someone else in this if someone heard a gunshot and came to investigate.
If you had had a choice, would you have rather used a gun?
I would have rather not have had to have done it at all, but if I had to, yes, I would have chosen a gun.
Why is that?
Because it would have been quicker and more humane.
All right, let's talk about, you arrive at the house, 122 Canebrake. Do you remember about what time you arrived there?
I think it was a little after 9 in the morning.
And do you arrive there on your bike? Is that how you-
Yes,
And you testified about this a little bit, but tell the jury what you're wearing.
I had on black pants and a black thermal and a gray shirt over that. I had on a black beanie and a white medical mask, and I had on black gloves and a black backpack.
you, do you remember how many vehicles were parked in the driveway when you got there?
One.
When you arrived at the house and you got off your bike, what did you do?
I laid my bike down in the driveway and I took my backpack off and I took out the box that had been gift wrapped, that had an end open. And I put the .22 revolver in that box. And I put the backpack back on my back and I took a bunch of roses and I walked up to the door and I rang the doorbell. And I was shaking and freaking out at this point because there was nowhere I wanted to be less than at that house on that morning. And when I rang the doorbell, the door opened and a woman came to the front. And I thought it was Christina Parcell, but I wanted to make sure. And I also wanted to make sure that no one else was home. So I told her that while I was holding the box and the roses, that I had a delivery for Lutina Parcell, her sister. And she told me that Lutina wasn't home. So at this point, I realized that Christina was at the house alone. And I handed her the roses. And I took the revolver out of the box and I pointed it at her and I told her to be quiet and to go back into the house, which she did. And I followed her into the house and I shut the door. And I was experiencing such anxiety that my body wasn't really doing what I was telling it to do anymore. Like when I realized that I couldn't use the gun, which was unloaded at this point, my plan had been to try to knock her unconscious because I didn't want to cause her or anyone any pain. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to save Aida and to make sure that no one else who was a bystander would be involved in this or could be endangered in any way. So I tried, while she was holding the roses, to strike her on the head and knock her unconscious. But my body was fighting me because even though I knew who she was and what she was doing and the danger that was putting Aida in, I was still looking at her and I was seeing a sympathetic figure. I was seeing a woman, and I had always been taught never to hurt a woman, to always protect women and children. So when I went to strike her with the gun, my hand didn't really do what I was trying to tell it to. I essentially pulled my strike. It felt like a time I had been cliff jumping with friends. I have a big fear of heights, and there was a 30-foot face that you could jump off and jump into a deep pool of water. And when I would run up to the edge, I would try to get a running start and jump off the edge, and I just couldn't. Like my body would stop me against my will. And I had to try to do this 10 or 15 or 20 times before I could actually get myself to go over the edge. So when I struck her on the head with the pistol, that's what happened. It didn't knock her unconscious, and I hardly struck her at all, to be honest. So I tried again, and the same thing happened. I just couldn't bring myself to strike her. And at this point, she realized that I was hesitating, and she began to try to move herself and to get away and to fight back. And during this period of time, the roses had dropped and the petals and stems had scattered. And as I was hesitating, I realized that the situation was quickly getting out of control. And if I didn't pull myself together and act soon. This was all going to end up terribly for Aida because what was happening to her would never be uncovered.
You heard testimony that at this time, Christina weighed 163 pounds. How much did you weigh on October the 13th?
About 160.
Go ahead.
So I realized that I was going to have to somehow force myself to do this at any cost. So I pulled out the knife I was wearing. And even though I knew I wasn't going to be able to strike her with any amount of force, I still tried. So I started striking her, though my strikes were pulled. And I think the knife made contact with her, but it wasn't stopping her, and it wasn't inflicting anything that could be a fatal blow. And she started to fight back. She realized I was hesitating, and it became a struggle. And in this struggle, all I could do was try to overcome this resistance I had towards doing this thing. Even though I knew it was right, I still had this physical and emotional resistance to doing it. So I just kept striking her until finally we fell on the floor. And at this point, I had just tried to take my mind out of it and just try to get through this and finish it as quickly as possible, because I realized that it was only becoming prolonged, and I had to do this in order to save Aida. So I don't remember how many times I struck her. I just remember that when it finished, we were on the ground, and I stopped striking her when she stopped struggling. And at this point, I stood up, and I was still freaking out, and I was in kind of a daze. And I was just trying to pull myself together and figure out what I needed to do to leave the house. And again, I wanted to make sure that I didn't leave anything behind that would connect me to it, because then I believe John would be connected to it, and it would only further put Aida in danger, because I didn't know if Christina Parcell was the only person involved in what was happening to Aida. And she wasn't. So I quickly looked around to make sure I hadn't left a mask or a glove, and I started to pick up the rose petals and realized that I just didn't have time to do that. Again, I was concerned that a neighbor might have heard the commotion and that a neighbor might come by to investigate, and I didn't want that. So I drew the blinds and I moved her body away from the door, which had windows, because I didn't want someone to come to the door and see her. And I put my things back in the backpack, and I looked in a mirror before I left to make sure everything was in order, and I saw that she had scratched my face in the struggle. And of course, I realized that this could leave DNA. So I used the paint thinner to try to clean her hands. And then I changed my mask, and I took off my outer shirt because there was blood on it. And I put it in the backpack. And at this point, I was really worried that someone, that Lutina might come back to the house, or Brad Post might come to the house, or a neighbor might come over. So I was trying to leave the house as quickly as possible. And before I left, when I realized that I had probably left my DNA there, despite my effort not to, I prayed again and just said that I believe that what I've done is the right thing, and I believe that I did it for the right reason. But if it's your will that I be connected to this, then I will turn myself in and I will own up to what I've done, and I'll take responsibility for it because I believed that it was the right thing. And then I left. I exited out through the door and I got back on my bike and I pedaled my bike back to the truck and I drove back to the mountain house. And I was still completely freaking out and it felt entirely surreal. But there is a big difference in how I felt, in that as soon as I left the house, I felt the most enormous wave of relief wash over me, because I knew from that moment on, Aida would be safe. Aida would be safe from the sexual abuse that her mother was perpetrating on her. And there is proof to that the state is hiding from you.
Your Honor, instruct him to be quiet.
You need to stop talking.
Wow, he snuck that on up in there. I don't know, guys. This guy kind of creeps me out. It's just something about him. I'm not for sure. He's just weird. And I've never seen a trial where the person admitted that they did kill the person that they being accused of killing, and not for self-defense or any reason like that. It's crazy. All right, let me skip on through. It's a good thing about watching it, I guess, being behind. We don't have to watch the unnecessary stuff. Let's see where, believe it or not, that would cut a lot of time off of the video.
Law in this case, and while you, the jury, sit as the sole judge of the facts, and part of my role is to make determinations about what evidence can and cannot be admitted and presented to you, the jury, and that gatekeeping role rests solely with me.
We had to do this the last time.
And I want to instruct
They
you
took
that
a
you're not to
break.
consider any testimony that I have instructed to you.
Because Mr. Hughes
And furthermore, you should not even mention or discuss any testimony that I have
made a statement in his testimony.
And I instruct you not to discuss any topics that have been ruled improper when you deliberate. Thank you. Mr. Moore.
That he had ruled
Just
out
got a few more
evidence
questions.
for them to be able to present.
So after you left Canebrake, isn't it true that you rode your bike back to your truck, which was parked within the vicinity? Isn't that true?
Yes.
And then you drove your truck back to the mountain house. Isn't that true?
That's true.
After you got to the mountain house, isn't it true that you disposed of the gun and the knife in a nearby lake? Isn't that true?
Yes, that is true.
And isn't it true that the clothes you were wearing,
You could tell the guy's
you burned those
intelligent.
clothes in a fire pit at the mountain house? Isn't that true?
Yes.
But it's just weird. To me, there's something
I
about
want
him.
to talk about towards the end of October, beginning of November. Isn't it true that at the very beginning of November 2021, you had obtained a plane ticket to fly overseas? Isn't that true?
Yes, that's true.
And you were going to go overseas departing from Detroit. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And while you were in Detroit, isn't it true that you received a phone call making you aware that there were warrants pending for your arrest.
That is true.
And after you were notified of the pending warrants, isn't it true that you rented a car, drove back in the middle of the night to Greenville, and ultimately turned yourself in? Isn't that true?
Yes, that is true.
One second. I don't have anything else.
Okay. At this moment, well, can I see Council?
Hey, this will probably be the end of day 6. They're actually on day 7 right now, so I think they're actually about to do closing arguments on day 7 right now, or already doing closing arguments. I'm just glad I finally caught up on the trial. Appreciate you guys for watching it with me. Got behind, but we got caught up too. So I'm pretty sure they're going to probably end day 6 here. So I'll probably go ahead and start streaming day 7 after that. And then after the day, depending on what goes after closing arguments, we should be on track and caught up. It's a good day to catch up on the trial. Snowy and cold outside. Got my electric blanket.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to break for the day. And I'm going to ask that y'all return at 10:30 tomorrow morning. I'm hoping that we're not going to have bad weather, but just potentially that will give a little extra time, and also for me to take up a few things that I need to do with the attorneys. I want to, again, thank you on behalf of the state of South Carolina and in Greenville County for your service. I am so grateful for your attentiveness and abiding by all my admonitions to you. And again, I just remind you, do not watch anything on this. Do not discuss this. Do not begin deliberating until I tell you. Okay? I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.